Okay, good morning, everybody. We're going to start Unit 1 today. What you'll see is this PowerPoint. I'll also just post the PowerPoint plain if you want to go through it yourself. I will do this lecture just like I do in class. There'll be this one, and then 2 days from now, there'll be the second part of it. And then at the end of the week, there'll be a quiz on what the information contains. So you can do whatever you want. Watch the lecture and take notes. I'm going to go pretty quick, but you can always pause it, or you can just go through it yourself on your own. So we start the course with some definitions. We do need to understand a few things about government. Does it matter? Does government and politics matter? A lot of people just throw up their hands and go, oh, whatever. But that's just a rhetorical question. But think about how government and politics impacts your life. It already does. You're 17, 18 years old, and you do a lot of things that matter that government controls. Things like, of course, public school. There's a mandate for you to be in public school. There's a state thing. Driving, of course, most of you drive, I'm assuming, and you had to go through the state to get permission to drive on the public roads. Of course, there's taxes. Anybody who works, any of you who work already know this, and you probably know it anyway from your parents, but taxes are something that government has an impact on, both federal and state level. Alcohol, of course, is regulated by the government. It's actually regulated by the states. We'll talk about that when we talk about the Constitution and the Supremacy Clause and how states and local governments interact, or national local governments interact in the way of federalism. Voting, a way to participate. That's controlled by governments, controlled by the state. You all have Social Security numbers, which are a government entity. So the government can identify you, and then that's associated with all sorts of things. Minimum wage. Some of you who work might be working for the minimum wage. Both national and states establish minimum wages. And the last one, that says student loans. And most of you going to college. If you don't know it, most of the student loans out there are controlled by the national government. And that control started about 8, 9, 10 years ago, something like that. So it does matter. It has impacted your life. But then you get to the point where less than a quarter of people your age follow politics. And again, it's like, well, who wants to do that? It's boring. It's old people, blah, blah, blah. But if you don't follow politics, then you can't really participate properly in our republic. But 3/4 of senior citizens do, and that makes a difference in policy. We'll talk about that when we talk about who votes and how and all of that as the year goes on. Okay, so then you get to this quote. This is not something that's going to be tested, but you get the idea, and this has to do with following politics and government, is there's never been nor ever will be a people who are politically ignorant and free. That is a very true statement. When this republic goes along after I'm not here, it's going to be in your hands. And you guys all need to pay attention. That's one of the reasons for taking this class. Okay, so let's get to our definitions. We do have to define some things, so we'll start with the class. It's called AP Government and Politics, so we'll need to define government here. And government this is a generic definition. The institutions and processes through its public policies are made for a society. But there are fundamental questions that government answers, and that's how should we govern? That's really not a thing that we're dealing with anymore. That happened 200 plus years ago. But this is what we fight over, is what should government do? These are where our fights in the United States are, and when I say fights, they're hopefully just rhetorical fights. But what should government do? And this is where the parties differ and where people differ. What do all governments have in common? In one way, shape, or form, 200 plus nations in the world, they maintain a national defense. There's our headquarters of our national defense, the Pentagon there. They provide public services in some way, shape, or form. They preserve order, or sometimes they don't preserve order. They socialize the young. This class is actually socializing you That's one reason you take it, and we'll talk about that when we talk about political socialization. They also collect taxes in some way, shape, or form. So that's kind of the things that government does generically. We got some more definitions. The other part of the class is called politics. It's AP US Government and Politics. So we need to know what politics is. Politics is the process by which we select our government leaders and what policies those leaders pursue. So that is the process. Voting, of course, you see there is the most used way that we participate, and we select, of course, our leaders. But it also can be defined as who gets what, when, and how. Kind of the same way you can define that as economics. Who gets what, when, and how. And that's where we, again, have our disagreements throughout our society. All right, so participation. We participate in politics in the United States, and there's various ways we do it, but we do need our definition. All the activities used by citizens to influence the selection of political leaders or the policies they pursue. So it's more than just selecting our leaders, our representatives, our senators, and the president. It is also about the policies, and people actually do that, believe it or not. The most common way, of course, you can probably guess, the most common way we do participate, of course, is voting. But there are other ways that, for instance, this particular image shows both sides of a protest, right? So there are interest groups, there are protests, there are campaigns. I mean, you can participate in campaigns. Somebody you want to get elected, you can join that campaign and try to work to get them elected. Some of you may already do that, even at your age. Okay, so the system then to make policy, this all has to do with participation, but believe it or not, people do shape policy. It's more than just, oh, it's just the rich people or it's just corporations. It's not. It is people. People do this. So it's important that we participate. So people's interests, problems, and concerns, all this is going to come and create a circular process, and I'll post a picture of that later on when this is over. But it starts with linkage institutions. How do we get our interests, problems, and concerns known to the people who make the decisions? And those are through 4 linkage institutions. So our definition of it is there. The political channels through which people's concerns become political issues on the policy agenda. And those 2 things are going to be defined shortly. And all we need to know right now is what the 4 are. There'll be another unit, it'll be next semester, there'll be a significant portion of that unit that covers each of these 4 things. But the 4 things are elections, most common, political parties, interest groups, and interest groups are people, so a lot of times we look at interest groups and think of that as a negative connotation, but interest groups are people. And then the media. Those are the 4 linkage institutions that we have. So now we get to some more definitions. The policy agenda. How does it become a policy agenda? It's the issues that attract the serious attention, and the key word there is serious. The serious attention of public officials and others involved in politics. So if it doesn't get the serious attention, then it's not going to be an issue, and it's not going to be on the policy agenda. Okay, again, this is going to be a circular flow that we'll look at. And I'll post a picture of it in a little bit. Once it becomes high on the policy agenda, it does then become a political issue. Once they know about it, then it becomes an issue. And an issue arises, and this is the most important word here, is disagree. Arises when people disagree about a problem and how to fix it, and that's what we do. The 2 parties disagree. We can actually all have different opinions on what the problem is and how to fix it. And that makes it a political issue. And then once it's a political issue, it goes to the places that make the policy. And that's the branches of government charged with taking action on political issues. So those branches are, of course, Congress and the presidency are the most important. Sometimes it's actually federal courts. And a lot of times, and when we get to Unit 2, we'll talk about this. We'll talk about the bureaucracy and how decisions are made in the bureaucracy that might not be what Congress and the president actually wanted. But we'll see that when we get to Unit 2. So again, once the policy is made, it becomes what we call public policy. Once there is some sort of agreement on how to fix it, then it becomes law and it becomes public policy. Okay, so let's define public policy. It's a choice that government makes. So the other things are things that people do. Now it's a choice that government makes in response to that political issue, that disagreement. So again, it's going to be, we're making a circle here, and you'll see the end of it shortly. Then the policies affect people in various ways. It's spending, of course, that is a big part of it. It's taxation. Taxes and spending are a lot of the choices that government makes. It's passing a variety of other laws if it's a political issue that requires laws to be passed. It's regulations created by the bureaucracy. And it also, very importantly, includes non-decisions. That can happen too. A public policy could be a non-decision. They did not do anything. And that could be something as well. So non-decision is an important part of that. And then we got the circular flow because we're back to people's interests, problems, and concerns. Like I said, shortly I'll post a picture of that on my board. It's just on my whiteboard, so I'll show you how the institutions interact with each other and it becomes this circular flow. So you'll see that in a graphic form here, and I'll post that a little bit later. So the last thing then today is we'll use the word democracy, but we need to understand that we're using the word democracy in a different way. It is not the way you learned in world history, Athenian democracy. So it's a system of selecting policymakers and organizing government so that it responds to the public preferences. Okay, so that is our definition in today's America. We use the word democracy all the time, but our government isn't. It's a republic. So we didn't start using the word democracy to describe our government until the 20th century or early in the 20th century. But we use it, so we have to make sure we know that it is not like ancient Greece. It's not majority rule, period. And we'll talk about some of that in the next lecture in 2 days. We'll talk a little bit about that. Our use of democracy means selecting people to represent us. That's what we talk about. You'll watch any of the things. You watch Fox News, CNN, whatever. You will see that they're using the word democracy. We're using our democracy to elect a president, blah, blah, blah. So that's the idea. Our democracy is a means of selecting people to represent us. So that should do it for today. We'll finish this up. I'll post this next lecture on Wednesday, and we'll finish up these ideas about the basic intro